Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Resistance Live. It is the 24th of October, 2025. I can't believe we're almost a year from the midterms, and we have very significant elections coming up next week. So let me just start with that as a quick reminder to everybody. If you live in California, please vote for Prop 50. If you live in Pennsylvania, please vote to preserve the state Supreme Court in Democratic judicial hands. If you live in New Jersey, you know you need to vote for Mikey Sherrill. If you live in Virginia, please vote for Abigail Spanberger, and please pay attention to what is happening in your local elections around the country. There's an enormous amount going on right now, and off-season elections, so to speak, are just as important as the main ones. So please make sure you vote. Early voting here in New Jersey starts tomorrow. I intend to be the first in line, as usual. So in any event, please pay attention to that. All right. The topic of the hour today is a truly crazy and ridiculous statement by Steve Bannon on one of the podcasts, claiming that Trump will be the president after 2028. Count on it. Okay. And it has caused a lot of panic. And I was on a call with a bunch of other organizers yesterday where this issue came up because it was floating to the top of all the major social media platforms, and a lot of people were really kind of losing it over what Bannon meant. And there was a lot of discussion about just the way in which so much propaganda these days is designed to terrify people. And so I want to just go through this issue of a potential third term in some detail, because it is extremely unlikely to happen, all right, for a variety of reasons, even outside the law, all right? But I want everybody to kind of understand the why of this, and then to be reassured that notwithstanding where we are right now, all hope is not lost. And again, one of the things that I just want to remind everyone of is that the key balancing point of this environment that we're in right now is to take seriously the threats that they're making while simultaneously not allowing ourselves to fall into despair, okay? So I just want to make it really clear. These statements by Bannon are designed for one purpose only, and that is essentially to terrify the population into submission and to essentially become a predictive text, okay? One of the things that everybody needs to understand is that the Constitution of the United States is completely plain on this front. You may not run for more than 2 terms of the presidency. If you happen to be someone who is president because you're vice president, you become president because you were the vice president and the president dies in office or resigns, you still are limited to a total of 10 years. You cannot run again, all right? There is no way under the Constitution for Trump to run for a third term, okay? In addition to that, there are people out there with wild speculation that are like, well, they're going to amend the Constitution. They don't have the votes to do that, okay? You have to understand that in order for that to happen, there has to be like two-thirds of a 2/3 vote to amend the Constitution has to move through Congress, and then it has to be approved by 3/4 of the state legislatures. The Republicans simply do not have the votes for that, all right? In addition to that, even if, let's just assume they wanted to give it a run, Trump is not a well man. We all know this. We spent a lot of time on this broadcast talking about his health, his well-being, the signs of his decline, this crazy bruise that keeps showing up on his hand, these mysterious trips to Walter Reed that they claim are for regular procedures, but they're happening every 6 months. There's a lot of evidence out there right now that he's simply not well. And I don't even mean that from like a mental perspective, which is like on display day in and day out at this point. I also mean it from a physical perspective. And so there are big questions about whether or not he's going to be healthy, or, you know, potentially whether he makes it through this term period. Okay, so that's another issue. And then leaving everything else aside, I just have to remind you all that, you know, one of the really key features of this era is that there is an awful lot of discourse out there, including, unfortunately, from people on our side of the fence, that lends to this kind of like commentary of like, we're fucked, or all hope is lost, or America had a good run, you know, that kind of thing. And I have to say that while I understand cynicism as a coping mechanism, like I get that for some people, that's their baseline means of psychological cope. It's not for me. You all know that. And that's one of the reasons why you all are here, right? But I have to remind everybody that like we literally have no idea what's going to happen between now and 2028, right? We do have elections coming up next week. We have midterms coming up next year. We know that there are certain very concerted efforts undertaken right now to change the scope of districting. This is one reason why California's got to vote yes on Prop 50, why it needs to pass. They're trying to manipulate things in Indiana and other places. Virginia has now entered the fray, claiming that they are going to redistrict in favor of Democrats. There's an enormous amount of things happening on the playing field for this. And that's on top of the fact that we have no idea what's going to happen from a nationwide organizing standpoint, okay? The backstop to everything, by the way, is we the people, right? Is our capacity to organize for change locally, on a state level, and nationally, and the means by which that could move the needle, because anything at this point, when well organized, could be a tipping point. So one of the things that I want people to just be very mindful of is that the right wing has gotten very good at scaring people. Another example of this is Trump's statements yesterday that, you know, like he can kill anybody, anywhere, anytime he wants, essentially, when talking about these strikes on these boats in the Pacific and the Caribbean. I'm just going to tell you all right now that the willfulness to mass murder people on the open seas, I've said this many times here before, is not only a violation of international law and pretty much every international treaty that we've ever entered into, okay? It's also like a violation of due process and all sorts of principles that are supposed to exist inside the United States. But in addition to that, it is designed for a couple of mechanisms. The first is, of course, as I mentioned yesterday, they like to create these snuff films that make them look tough, like murdering people on the high seas. Woo, we're so powerful, right? Innocent fishermen in boats that we're mass murdering. Ooh, we're so powerful, right? They like to do that. But in addition to that, it's designed to send this message that, in fact, they could kill anyone, anywhere, at any time, and it could be you, right? One of the things that again, this Bannon, I mean, it's verging on a psyop, to be honest. It literally is something that is designed to psychologically manipulate people into thinking that there is some possibility that Trump could be president for a third term, okay? It is extremely unlikely. Like, you know, I will just like call it, you know, I think it's like a less than 1% chance, and it would require a whole series of dominoes to fall, not to mention for him to survive, okay? Like all these health ailments that we currently know that he has. But in addition to that, just a reminder, right? We are not powerless in all of this. We will never be powerless in all of this. And I have more to say about this later on in the broadcast today, because there is something really significant about the way that we talk about these things, about the way that we organize, about the way that we invite people to participate in acts of resistance, that we really need to be talking about on a more overt level right now, okay? But the thing that we have to look at when we look at Steve Bannon, who, by the way, is not a reliable arbiter of what's to come in this country. Can I just make that very clear? Like somebody pointed out last night on Blue Sky, for instance, this is not ancient history, that he's the person who propped up Roy Moore to run in Alabama, and who was soundly defeated by Doug Jones. He propped up a child molester to run for the Senate in Alabama, who lost so badly in Alabama that a Democrat was elected to the U.S. Senate. So again, we shouldn't be taking him as some great predictor, Nostradamus of what's to come, right? Is Bannon a scary figure? Yes. Also, he's not infallible. I'm going to remind you all that he served like a large term in prison last year. So nobody should be looking at this through the lens of like, he knows something we don't know, or they're planning blah, 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 blah. He is literally spouting nonsense like he does every day on his podcast. And it's really critical that we take it for what it is, which is an attempt to terrify people into submission. Like, that's it. Okay. There's no factual basis for Trump to run for a third term. There's no legal basis for Trump to run for a third term. There's literally no justifiable way that they can make it happen. And even if they throw the Constitution in the trash and set it on fire, there's still protocols that will exist and attempts to stop him and efforts in the streets that will prevent it. So again, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. And also, I just have to remind everybody, I know everybody is operating at like a level of anxiety or depression or both right now that is kind of like hard to cope with. Like, believe me, I get it, right? Like, I see it in my own community. I myself have moments of burnout. I understand it. And still, it is really critical right now when you see something like this and you have that physical reaction in your body of like, oh my God, to actually do the critical thinking of how likely is this to take place. I'll also just point out that Charlotte Clymer, if you want like much more intricate detail than what I've already given you about why he can't run for a third term, Charlotte Clymer has done a really incredible thread this morning on this issue that goes through literally every single domino that would have to fall legally for Trump to even try it. And they simply don't have the votes, the support, the base, the law on their side at all for something like this. Okay. So everybody needs to kind of like cool down and calm down around this. All right. This morning, Trump cut off all trade talks with China because he didn't like an ad, a fake ad, nonetheless, like an ad, or it's claimed to be fake, but it's not really fake. An ad that has run on Canadian television with Ronald Reagan talking about the fact that tariffs are bad. On that basis, he erupted on Truth Social in 2 posts and basically cut off all negotiations over trade with Canada on tariffs and anything else. All right. Mark Carney, new PM of Canada, was out this morning just off a plane. And he basically said what we all know already, which is that the U.S. right now is entirely unpredictable on trade, thanks to Trump, that the lay of the land has changed dramatically since Trump was elected the first time. And while Canada cannot have any control, and this, by the way, is true for any one of our trading partners, allies, or anyone else around the world, while Canada has no control over what Trump does next, they do have control over who they engage in trade with. And he's totally right. And simultaneously, that means very significant things for what it is going to mean for the future of the U.S. standing on the international trade stage, okay? Because they're going to make deals with China, and they're going to make separate deals with Europe, and they're going to make deals that cut the U.S. entirely out of international trade. And that's terrible. Like, you know, I can't put it any more plainly. By the way, the national debt has risen. That was announced this morning. The national debt, notwithstanding Doge and everything else, has risen at levels that have not been seen since the middle of the pandemic, thanks to these tariffs. So, you know, the proof is in the pudding. It's not an easy time, but more to come on that in a minute. All right. So the government shutdown is continuing. We all know this. Today is the first day that government workers have not gotten a paycheck, thanks to Donald Trump. And in addition to that, we are still on track to have food stamps cut off on November 1st, a week from tomorrow. I am going to say to everybody here again, if you have a few extra dollars to spare, or you have a few extra canned goods in your pantry, please walk them down to your local food bank and make sure that they have what they need, because things are about to get very, very, very dire. And again, I have to point out that enormous percentages of children survive on the benefits that are about to be cut. Enormous amounts of families, even families with working parents, because I have to remind everybody, most of the people who are on WIC have jobs and SNAP, like, are going to be going hungry. And it is really on us, those of us who have even just a little bit to spare, to make those donations and to check in with our local food banks to make sure that they have what they need. Because I, by the way, have been hearing that there are already shortages. I also spoke to someone this morning who is a housing advocate in New York City who said that there's an enormous number of people in New York City alone who live on less than $12,000 a year, and without these SNAP benefits are going to starve. So very, very important that you are doing your part there. And I'm just going to mention that the optics of what now it went from 250 to 300 to $350 million on this new ballroom. The optics of this suck for Trump. But this may be a turning point. The other thing I have to point out is that November 1st is the last deadline in many instances for healthcare exchanges in states that apply the ACA, which is everyone, for the healthcare exchanges to announce the premium increases for next year. I personally am terrified about this. My anxiety is growing the closer that we get to November 1st, because right now under the ACA where I live, I pay $1,200 a month for a basic healthcare plan with an individual deductible of $6,500 and a family deductible of like $13K. I'm very concerned that the premiums are going to skyrocket to a point that it's going to be like health insurance or housing. It's hard to imagine being in that position as a single mother of 2 young kids. But that's where we are. And that combined with the end of SNAP benefits, it creates conditions for a lot of people to be like really angry and maybe to become active for the first time. So this is one thing that I want to remind you all of, is that there are points of opportunity in crisis. And one of the things that we have to do, in addition to shoring up our neighbors and making sure that people are provided for and have the food that they need to survive, is to also remember that there may be people in your own community who have had their heads in the sand, or who have avoided politics for whatever reason, or who maybe have leaned Trump, who are about to get an awakening of how the decisions that he is making and that the Republicans are making, because reminder, they are in charge of the House, the Senate, and the presidency. This is not a Democratic shutdown. That's not what this is. They could exercise the nuclear option and pass a budget like today if they wanted to, okay? The thing to remember here is that you have opportunities to have conversations with people who maybe don't understand what's been happening, who maybe have not really put 2 and 2 together yet. And those chickens are about to come home to roost. And rather than being nasty, rather than doing the thing of like, how could you not know about this, right? Which I know is an impulse for some of us, is that we're going to have to do the thing of having those conversations that educate people about how we got here, okay? And again, one of the things that a lot of organizers are talking about right now is that you don't need to move people from, hardcore MAGA into full-time activism on behalf of progressives, right? Well, all that we have to do right now is move people a little bit along the needle, right? Move somebody who is like, checking out, not paying attention, into a place of maybe being like, wow, maybe I should think about going to the next protest, or who maybe has like been sort of like, yeah, this is kind of looking kind of terrible, but I'm not really sure what to do, into actually attending an organizing meeting, right? We don't need to move everybody to the side of like disruptive action to create society-wide shift, all right? But this is going to be a clusterfuck. Like, sorry, I know that's the second time I've dropped an F-bomb on today's broadcast, but seriously, the beginning of November is going to be very, very rough if things don't shift in the next week. And this is a real opportunity in that moment of crisis to start explaining to people how we got here and what they can do if they don't like it. And again, this has to be graceful. You got to extend some patience. I know it's really hard after 10 years of this shit to sometimes be like, how could you not know? But we're going to need everybody that we can get activating against this come the 2026 elections. And I really want people to, and for the next 2 weeks, by the way, because, again, these off-cycle elections are coming up like a week from Tuesday. We really need to be understanding that we need everybody that we can working for the greater good right now, because that's one of the ways in which things really start to move quickly. All right. So that brings me to like a topic that I just wanted to talk about today that really was born out of this call that I was on yesterday. And it concerns the concept of a culture of defiance. All right. So one of the things that we can see when we look at what's been happening in Chicago and in Portland and in other parts of the country and, at No Kings, in the way in which, some of these protests are very joyful, even in the face of violence. There's dancing, there's music, there's costumes, frogs, unicorns, right? We've all seen this. Is that it creates a culture that people want to be a part of, right? And that is a culture of defiance. It is a culture that says, we are going to be out here, we are going to be joyful, we are going to be fighting back, and this is something that you want to be a part of. And defiance doesn't always look like, huge protests in the streets. Somebody reminded me yesterday that, for instance, during the Pinochet regime, when people were afraid to even be seen as opposing the regime because of horrible mass murders and tortures that were being carried out, there were efforts on a society-wide level to just slow things down. Like, people would actually start driving more slowly in the streets to stop things from moving in the Capitol. There were efforts made, and others have talked about this, inside government to slow down processes of persecution. We've seen some of this happen here, by the way, right? It can also include things like on a local level, engaging in actions that are designed to disrupt. So this morning, there was an announcement that the first town in Maine that had signed its police department on to cooperate with ICE has exited the cooperation agreement. And that took place because of local protests, like No Kings, in the streets of that town. Okay, and local activists making their voices heard about the fact that they do not want ICE cooperating. All right. The way that this happens is by cultivating this culture of defiance that people want to be a part of. This culture that says, you are not powerless. You can step up and do this here. And look, it's safe and it's fun and you can do it in this way. And lots of people are doing it. And, it creates a FOMO. Don't you want to be a part of this? You can make a difference, right? So rather than doing this thing of like beating people into submission with how bad it is, it's so terrible. How can you not be out in the streets? I'm so frustrated. Why don't you care about this? Why won't you, my neighbor, show up and do X, right? Start thinking about it as cultivating this movement of defiance that is inevitable, that is joyous, and that is designed to be something that people want to be a part of, all right? And again, I have to remind you, it comes in so many forms, right? It doesn't have to be these big public things, right? It can come in small ways of throwing sand in the gears wherever you live and work, and I have to point something else out. There are a lot of discussions right now about what's coming in the context of Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Some of you may have seen references to something called blackout the system, which, is not something right now that has taken a huge amount of hold. But I will just point out that there are ongoing discussions right now about nationwide consumer boycotts on Black Friday in opposition to Trump. And, we've seen what Black women organizing against Target was able to accomplish. Their profits dropped by 15%. I think people need to start thinking about this on a multitude of levels. All right. And, I just also want to point something out here. This cannot be performative. It's really important when you are cultivating this culture of defiance that it is not performative. This is one reason why I find these like safety pin things that somebody's mentioning in the comments as not effective. Okay. First of all, people can lie. They can show up with a safety pin claiming that they're safe when they're not. But also that makes people feel like they're doing something when they really aren't. What I'm talking about is cultivating a culture where people are confident and brave enough to take actual action. Not just pretend they're taking action by putting on a symbol, but actually taking action. Even if that action is like slow walking somebody's paperwork in a courtroom who's been arrested for protesting, right? It's very important, like very, very important that we start thinking about actual actions that people will want to be a part of that will in fact slow down or stop the regime. So please start thinking about this. Like, I really find this concept of a culture of defiance to be really compelling, especially when you think about it not as having to move people all the way from like ignorance to, I don't know, sit-down strikes in the Capitol building, right? But when you think about it instead as moving people from like one place to the next logical step. I am going from total ignorance about this to maybe showing up for a local meeting. I'm going from total ignorance about this or, not paying attention because it's too scary to me to at least not buying anything on Black Friday. These are all things that, we need to think about in the context of our work as organizers. And I just want to really urge everyone to start thinking about this very seriously, again, because beginning of November is going to be freaking brutal. And that is a tremendous opportunity, in addition to like a crisis, in addition to a tragic set of circumstances in the history of the United States of America. So do the thing, invite people along, right? Like make sure that we are thinking about how we can move people to actual action. All right. And again, we have to be I just have to say this, white women love symbols, and we have to be very, very we have to remind ourselves, right, that like symbols are not action, right? That it is critically important right now that when we are motivating other white people, we are motivating them to actually do things, right? Like to actually take action, okay? And not just like feel like they're part of something, but actually do something in furtherance of it. All right. So that's my concept instruction for today. We close our new program for registration, which is Power Lab. That's our 7-week course for emerging organizers to move from outrage to building community power. Registration for that closes a week from today. Scholarship applications close tonight at 8 p.m. So if you want to get in on that, as always, I will drop a link up here. It's already in the show notes. It will also be in the comments below. Please join us for that if you're interested in figuring out how to turn the overwhelm and the outrage of this moment into actually building community action, because that's what this whole short course is about. We are only offering this course once. This, by the way, will also be the last opportunity for the foreseeable future to work with me in a public class, because come 2026, we're focusing on our work inside the Ripple Effect Institute, which is our strategy incubator and think tank for people who are here to create generational level change. Please get in on Power Lab if you have any interest in that. Don't forget to like this broadcast, subscribe wherever you're listening. Please make sure you share it with your friends. Drop me a comment if you're listening after the broadcast is over live. And I will be here this afternoon for our Patreon subscribers for our bonus weekly broadcast at 3 p.m. Eastern. If you want to get in on that, you can join us over at patreon.com/resistancelive for 20% off annual subscriptions right now using the code FALL2025. All right, my friends, I will see you all later if you're a Patreon subscriber. We have an educational video coming on Monday on our Ripple Effect Institute YouTube channel on the topic of how to save democracy in 2025. No small topic there, but you can tune in for that if you would care to. And I will see the rest of you back here live next week. All right, enjoy your weekend, everyone. Take care. Bye. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.